thrilled to be joined by Dallas Price, a true standout in the North American tech and startup ecosystem. Dallas has spent his entire professional career working with and building over 100 startups from ideation to growth phase, including taking on the co-founder role at Leo Prestte, where his team develops brand strategy, content, and identity systems for startups globally. Currently, he's on the growth team at Forum Ventures in their new venture studio, where his team is working to launch 8 seed stage startups annually. If that all wasn't enough, Dallas is also currently leading the digital nomad life, serving entrepreneurs on the road and getting a taste for the different startup communities across the US and Canada. We'll discuss all of it, and I'll let Dallas get into the nitty-gritty about his path as an entrepreneur, his strategies for building successful startups, and his take on the current state of venture funding and building a scale-up in 2023. So without further ado, Dallas, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks so much. And really appreciate the intro. I think that, encapsulates most of my life at this point. So really appreciate that. Super excited to be here.
Awesome. We're so thrilled to have you. Yeah, like I said, you have got an impressive resume. You truly are a standout, I think, in the North American startup ecosystem. I do want to start talking about that digital nomad life you have. But before we get into there, I'd love to learn more about just who is Dallas? Where did you begin? Where did you kind of get that taste for the entrepreneur bug? What motivates you? And how did you get into the whole scene to begin with?
Yeah, so my journey into tech wasn't super straightforward or like a very clear path. I grew up in Winnipeg where there was essentially no tech scene. There was like skip the dishes and people talking about skip the dishes at the time. And that was pretty much the tech scene. So through university, I actually ended up with like a supply chain degree, took a couple internships, didn't like my job, didn't like my boss's job, didn't like my boss's boss's job, and realized like that probably wasn't going to be the path forward for me. So kind of at the end of university, I ended up meeting up with my now business partner, Armin Aranpour, got coffee and started talking about building a potential marketing agency. So at the time, to be honest, I knew very little about marketing or branding, and I probably hadn't even heard of really what tech was at that point. And basically that kind of started out on like the entrepreneurial journey. We were young and naive. If we knew what we knew now, we probably never would have started. But in having to start, we failed pretty poorly the first year. Ended up losing money of all things, which is actually kind of hard with the service business. So it's actually kind of impressive that, we managed to lose money in the first year. So but I mean, hey, when you lose money, you eventually have to figure out how to make money. So, maybe if we broke even, we never would have continued with that journey. So it definitely forced us to figure some things out. And that's kind of what led us into tech. Was basically the first year, full stack marketing agency. We'll pretty much do anything for anyone who will give us money. And then eventually through some research and just like talking with enough people, we realized that we had to niche down. And at the time I was getting super into tech. I listened to like a Y Combinator podcast, listened to Sam Altman. I was like, tech is everything. Tech is cool. This is exactly what I want to get into. And from there, I was kind of hooked. And that led us to niching down the agency. And we started basically focusing only working with startups, mainly around brand strategy and content strategy.
Oh, that's so cool. I love to hear that failing at the start and not characterizing it as failing is really kind of what gave you the taste to keep trying more. That would have scared away a lot of other folks, especially ones who probably came from a more traditional background where their expectations are, hey, I'm going to get into the startup space. It's going to be a growth business from the get-go, and it's what I learned in school. Whereas you learned something very different in school, and you even led in, like you said, with a marketing agency without knowing too much about marketing to begin with. That's really, really cool. And I feel like some of the best founder stories take that kind of winding road into the founder.
Yeah, 100%. It was definitely not straightforward, but I think definitely like that varied experience is like what's helping me now because I don't have this like traditional path.
Yeah, that's awesome. Now, I'd love to learn a little bit more about what you're doing today, especially in the venture space. I'd love to know more about the venture studios that you're working on before we bring it back to talk a little bit more about what you're doing day to day, because I could go on for years talking to you about that lifestyle.
Yeah, for sure. So I can break down Forum. Basically, we're a venture fund. We're out in New York and Toronto. And we have 3 main entities. We have an accelerator, extremely active. It's doing like 90 to 100 deals this year. So we're working with a ton of entrepreneurs. It's B2B SaaS focused and really around go-to-market and fundraising. And then we have the seed fund. The seed fund focuses on checks that are about 400 to 650K. Those are about half deals that come from the accelerator, half net new deals into the portfolio, and really focused on early stage startups that we think have obviously like a ton of potential. With that, like we'll go pretty much as early as like 2 people with a pitch deck in a garage, and as late as maybe like 100 to like 500K in revenue. Anything past that is like kind of where our expertise rolls off. And then the part that I work on is our venture studio. So this is our newest entity, about a year old now, and it's really kicking into high gear at this point. Basically, the idea is that we look at a ton of ideas, we understand the venture landscape. What if we came up with our own ideas? So we do our own idea generation through, I can dive into that deeper, but basically we come up with our own ideas, do a ton of work to like validate and vet those concepts and get conviction around the idea. From there, we'll install a founder, start working with the founder. And then after about a month period of working with the founder, we should have enough validation around the concept, a clear MVP, know what we're going to be building. And then from there, we'll incorporate the company. And then we write the first $250,000 check. From there, it's like a launched company. It's legit and we're building it. And then we have our own product team. So we have developers and designers, build out the MVP, build out the infrastructure. And then myself and a couple other individuals run the growth team. So now our goal is to obviously sell what we just made. And we're targeting around like 100K in ARR. At that point, you're probably ready for a seed round, can go out and raise that. And obviously Forum will, we have a decent chunk of equity in these companies, so we'll support all the way through. But at that point, you're probably like a legit company and can hire, and you're kind of needing less and less support from Forum.
That's so interesting. I love too that you guys are, like you said, really involved in ideating on what the actual company could be from the start. That's a unique take compared to some of the other guests we've had on the show, where it's a lot more about, hey, founders are coming to us with this idea. It's relatively pre-vetted, and we do believe in the market fit. And that's when the VC is coming in to really help get it off the ground. You guys are in it before there's even a CEO in place. Could you talk a little bit about how that process works? Just give me a little bit more color to that picture.
Yeah, so idea generation is definitely like the most nebulous part of this job. I'd like to say we have like this concrete, amazing process for generating ideas, but pretty much it's like, it's a volume play. Like in the last year, we've probably looked at like 500 different ideas, and about 75% of those concepts get killed before we even start working on them. So basically we have a Slack channel that everybody just throws ideas into, and then weekly our founders will score those ideas. And basically if any of them say, no, this isn't interesting, we don't work on it at all. If there's not like any sort of conviction from the partners, it doesn't really make sense for us to continue. So from there is when we actually like start looking at what the business would look like. So at the start, we're really looking at like mainly problems. So like something I was looking at recently was like forest fires. So what is the business out of there? I have no idea yet, but I know that forest fires is a massive problem. And that if you get even close to solving that problem, there's a massive venture scalable business. So really what we're looking for is like big, hairy problems. And then from there, we can generally distill those down into solutions. So what we're doing is we're doing a lot of reading the news. We're talking to experts. We run a lot of roundtables, jam sessions, things like that to really try and understand different large markets and figure out what potential solutions could be out of there.
I love that process. I also love big, hairy problems. That's an awesome approach to take to really, again, getting something that's a unique innovation and that will have legs. I mean, when you say forest fires, my mind immediately went to a recent guest who we had on, NatureBlocks. They are a Boast AI customer. They're trying to bring blockchain to the accountability for carbon offsets. And how their founders literally got the idea for their business was they had a nightmare about forest fires. They have family up in Canada who are being very, very directly affected by climate change at the moment. And they were like, what is one solution we can get here? They didn't immediately think blockchain would be the way, but they found a way there. And it's kind of similar to that approach you guys are taking. They're looking at the news, looking at what is actually going to be a tangible issue for the long term, and coming up with a solution that they can capitalize on, but also know that they're actually contributing to the solution.
Yeah, man. Sometimes my job is sitting there cold calling like building material providers, trying to get them on the phone to talk to them. Sometimes my job is like walking outside, listening to a podcast, trying to come up with ideas. So it can be like very varied as to like what a day-to-day looks like. Cause obviously like you have to do like the most creative side of things. And then like on the growth side, sometimes it's just a numbers game and you just gotta call people.
Oh man. Okay. So it is not a strict 9 to 5 in any realm, obviously.
Okay.
So now going back before we move on, where you get those founders. So you guys come up with the ideation, you come up with a lot of what the MVP is going to be and what the product is going to be before it gets there. But you also instill some leadership at these companies before you take them to the next level. How do you go about finding these leaders?
Yeah, 100%. So I initially thought this was actually going to be like the hardest part of the process. Not to say it hasn't been hard, but I've just been extremely and pleasantly surprised with the quality of founder we're getting to work with. So we run like a pretty strict recruitment process. We actually have a head of recruitment. Her full-time role is related to hiring internal forum employees and then finding founders. So we'll put up a job posting and we've actually gotten like a decent amount of inbound flow. The whole team is absolutely posting on LinkedIn and posting on Twitter and trying to drive those roles. But then we'll also do like a headhunting search. So we were recently looking at something in the climate space. There's a bunch of these different climate groups around with different tech execs. And we were strictly reaching out to those types of individuals we thought could potentially be good founders, talked a little bit about what the studio offers. And it's been a pretty attractive offer for people so far. And yeah, just the quality of founder we're getting to work with has been really solid.
That's fantastic. Are there any highlights from the venture studio so far that you're willing to talk about or that you really want to shine a light on?
Yeah, so we actually just launched our first venture. So it had taken about a year to basically get the first one off the ground. But now we'll probably be launching companies every 4 to 8 weeks, basically at this point. Obviously takes a little bit to get that first one, but super excited to have it out the door. So the first company is called Caden AI. It's an AI workflow tool. So basically, if you want to implement generative AI into your product, for example, if you wanted to do like call transcription instead of using the API with ChatGPT and having to write a bunch of code, basically you can use our no code builder to plug call transcription into your product. You can test out a bunch of different large language models, basically testing cost, output, latency, stuff like that, and make sure that you're making an educated decision on what model you'll be using and can basically test everything out before implementing it into your product. So we just launched that. We just hosted a generative AI meetup in Toronto. It was amazing to see how that ecosystem is all coming together. And yeah, we're launching that company with Davis Sawyer. He's pretty experienced in AI. He was a co-founder of a company called Deep Light, which they do some pretty complex stuff. It's like AI-driven optimization for deep neural networks. Way over my head from a technical perspective, but they ended up raising, about $9 million. Super excited to be co-building with him.
That's so exciting. Now, bringing it back to Dallas. Now, I have mentioned multiple times now, you're a digital nomad. You're on the road. You are pretty much leading this venture studio, again, from wherever you've landed most recently. I know right now you're in Tulsa, but could you tell me a little bit about how you're navigating this lifestyle, how you are working for the venture studio and coming up with these new ideas and working with founders and getting these businesses off the ground from the road as a digital nomad?
Yeah, so I went fully remote in about December last year, spent the majority of winter in Peru and Colombia, and just like really got away from the Canadian winter. So it's been great. And yeah, right now I'm in Tulsa, but I was also across Canada most of the summer. And honestly, it's been just like a really interesting experience. There's definitely like a bunch of highlights and like the amount of tech conferences I've gotten to go to. I started in Winnipeg, and then there's Uniting the Prairies in Saskatoon, and then Adventures in Calgary the next week. There's no way if I was centered in Saskatoon or Winnipeg still that I would have gotten to go to both of those. It just happened to be that I was working my way out to Vancouver, and it just all lined up really well. So just the amount of founders and ecosystems I've gotten to be a part of has been, just amazing. And it's just really cool to see kind of coast to coast what's happening in Canada, and just how every ecosystem is like really seeing growth. Not to say there's not a bunch of work still to do, but it is great to see the growth that's happening. And then from like a day-to-day perspective, like I try and keep my schedule as like normal as possible. So if you're looking at my life, whether it's Colombia or Peru or Tulsa, I mean, my 9 to 5 is pretty similar. I try and wake up at like a similar time. I don't bounce, like whatever time zone I'm in, I just pretend that's my regular time and I don't try and shuffle it too much. And then from there, yeah, I mean, I'm up at 7 at the laptop at 8. Somewhere there's a gym session in the day. And then, sometimes I'll work a little bit at night. But yeah, pretty much I just try and keep like Monday to Friday as like pretty standard. And then the weekend is where you get to go explore. So obviously, like whether you're in Columbia or Tulsa or Vancouver, the weekend is your time to go do whatever you want. And yeah, it was definitely interesting at the early stages getting kind of that schedule down. But once you get it kind of into like a regular schedule, it's like, yeah, I get to a new place, I get groceries, I unpack, and you kind of figure out where the gym is, and you're kind of setting up your life for whether it's a month or a couple weeks, wherever you are. And I think it's just important to get that like routine and schedule down, because the last thing you want to do is like really screw up your work schedule.
Totally. Yeah. And I think, again, like you had mentioned earlier, there's no standard 9 to 5. Sometimes it's as much as listening to a podcast, going for a walk, and then getting the ideation in there. Sometimes, though, I'm sure you are sitting at your desk in meetings, on Zoom calls for hours on end. You can't escape it no matter where you're working, I imagine.
100%. Yeah. And I mean, whether I'm in Columbia or I'm in Tulsa, like the workday looks generally pretty similar.
No, I feel that. Yeah. At Boast AI, we are a fully remote company. We have been pretty much since everybody went fully remote at the start of the pandemic, but it's afforded us so many of the opportunities too that you listed out there. I'm relatively new with the company. I started back in February, actually, but I've been able to go to so many events. I've been able to go up to Montreal for Startup Week. I was at Collision a few weeks back. It's given us the ability to put that money that we would be putting into physical real estate probably, and to actually meeting founders where they are and on their level. And it's something that's, I think, the most valuable to what we do at Boast AI, because again, we are brought to you by founders. A lot of the people who do a lot of the day-to-day work here at Boast are founders in their own right. They've done the whole scale-up situation. They've brought companies to the growth phase, and then they've come and they've helped us out here. So a lot of simpatico, I think, in both of our missions, speaking to that.
100%. And you'd never be able to build that team you're building without having a remote team. Like I know you're out of Boston. Like if they were just hiring in Vancouver or Toronto, they never would have been able to find you, right? Like our team is scattered, like South Carolina, Winnipeg, Toronto, Vancouver, Ottawa, like New York, of course. Like we're all over the place. So you'd never be able to assemble this group of 25 people if you were hiring for an organization that's at a physical location.
Absolutely. And you benefit so much from it. It levels the playing field. I feel so lucky to have found a Canadian company that does exactly what I want to be doing and gives me the opportunity to have these conversations. Again, I'm in Boston. We're based across North America, and I'll probably be in LA in a month and then back up in Calgary. And then hopefully I'm thinking Texas after that. It's just my vacation roadshow pretty much is what I'm angling for at this point. But it's really cool. And I just love that we have the opportunity. But again, it's good for business. It keeps us agile. It keeps us flexible. All of those fun buzzwords that we love to say in the startup community, but it's very true. Now, talking a little bit about the other companies that you work with from the Venture Studio, I know that you are familiar with Boast. You are actually friendly with people here at Boast. I'd love to know how, as a founder, you have gone about partnering with companies like Boast, whether it's for actually capitalizing on R&D tax credits, which is one pillar of our business, whether it's for just kind of giving you more room to get the work done that you want to do that's in your wheelhouse or your expertise. But what is your process, I guess, for seeking out this kind of collaboration?
Yeah, so we have like an all-star platform team. Like they're 100% world-class. Whenever I get to work with them, it's super amazing. And they've just done so much groundwork on setting up just some amazing partnerships. So we offer just a massive amount of money and perks just in software credits, infrastructure credits, stuff like that. So they've just done like an amazing job setting up a bunch of those partnerships. And like really what we're looking for is people who are actually like invested in early stage tech. Like if we're being honest here, when you're selling to a startup, there's not a whole lot of capital, but the idea is that they're going to grow over time. And they might not be a super profitable customer in the early stage, but when they hit that Series A, Series B, they become a very profitable customer. So we're really looking for people who are actually like investing into the ecosystem and are willing to like really provide support, whether that's through credits or whether that's through mentorship to our founders. And the other side that we're always looking is like we're always looking to help our startups sell into corporations. So if there's that side as well, obviously that's a huge leg up. Done, I think, like a really impressive job of having like a large list of corporate partners who are willing to at least hear pitches from our startups.
That's so cool. Yeah. And we're right there with you too. It's that key phase where you're not necessarily pulling in the revenue to extend your runway. You need to get creative with your capital strategy. And that is when Boast comes in. We're not looking to really tap into companies that are already writing checks for themselves. We want to make sure that they can take advantage of the free money that's on the table from the Canadian government, for instance. We even have the Quick Fund program in place to help companies tap into that before the end of the year without expending money they don't have. So it's basically doing more, getting creative with your capital strategy and making sure that you aren't leaving cash on the table. That's a big value add from Boast. And again, that's why we love working with companies at this stage. It means the most to them when we can give them those tax credits, because it truly means they have runway to get their product off the ground in some cases. If they're building their MVP, every dollar of R&D tax credits that they can put back into that, it's pivotal. It could be make or break. So that's something that we very much hold dear to heart on our end. And again, it sounds like it's very much what you guys are focused on over there.
Yeah, and this is actually like a huge competitive advantage for Canadian companies. Like the amount of support they receive from the federal government is actually significantly higher than what is available in the US. So just your dollars are actually going to like function a lot further in Canada. And the federal government actually has supported quite a bit in innovation and support, whether that's through SHRED or IRAP or some of the other programs. Even though we're a VC, we always say like, I mean, customer revenue is number one, but non-dilutive funding is your number two source of best capital. And then like ventures, third. But it's like the more money you can get in that non-dilutive capital, like that'll just stretch you out. And VCs love to see companies that are running on grants because it means they're very capital efficient.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's actually a learning that has been very eye-opening for me now that I've gotten my feet a little more wet in the Canadian tech ecosystem. I'm just amazed at how much funding is on the table for Canadian startups. The government is truly in the business of making sure that innovation not only happens, but it gets off the ground. It stays in Canada on one hand, but also just that Canadians are able to enjoy the benefits all around, whether that's more jobs in the region, whether that's just more tax capital, all the above. Canada wants to make it happen. And not to say that the US environment for startups is less friendly or that the tax credit system is less friendly. They're very different. And I think they're also in a state of flux, which kind of brings me to my next line of questioning. I'd like to blow it up a little bit and talk a little bit more about the state of startups generally. You've been on the road. You have a perspective on what is possible when you're a CCPC, if you start in Canada, if you leverage those Canadian tax credits. We also, I think, have a little bit of a shared perspective perhaps on what US companies are up against in terms of being a startup in 2023. Could you shed some light, whether your personal opinion or just from being in the venture studio, on what the current state of startups is and what tips you'd maybe say for founders trying to navigate it today?
Yeah, so the market is still definitely tight. That has not changed. I'm thinking like, the majority of VCs are, at their place in Lake Tahoe. They don't get a lot done during summer anyways. So I'm really excited to see like September, what starts happening. Public markets have obviously like really rebounded the past month. So I'm thinking that we could see, more of an influx of what's going on kind of around September. And I'm really looking forward to, I think things got like crazy in 2020 and not in a good way, where we just saw massive amounts of capital going into companies that never should have been built. You had your like 15-minute grocery delivery startups that were like spending $100 to acquire a customer that's worth $30, and like it never made sense. But I think we've actually gone too far into the other side now, where we're looking for like profitable companies at like the seed and Series A stage. And I don't think that makes any sense. The whole point of venture capital is that we're investing in companies that really wouldn't exist if it weren't for venture capital. These are companies that are taking large risks, developing innovative technologies, and they need upfront capital to build out those products and invest in growth ultimately to become, a large company. So I'm really looking to see things like, I think we swung the pendulum too far over into this, like looking for profitable companies when they shouldn't be profitable. If your CAC and LTV are out of line, of course we shouldn't be investing in that company. But if you're running like a 3-to-1 LTV to CAC, this is companies that we should be pouring money to, regardless of whether they're losing money. And if they're losing money over the course of, that year, but the customer is making up that value over a couple years. These are the companies that we should still be investing in, regardless of whether they're profitable at their Series A.
Absolutely. I love the way you put that. It's about finding that happy medium between the CAC and the LTV and just making sure that these companies, it's not swinging back one way or the other in terms of where we've been over the past 3 years. I was looking at some charts about just Q2 investments from VCs into some key Canadian markets and how they went down in Q1. It was a dry well, basically, if you were in Toronto or Vancouver. And they're back up again. It's a lot of mega deals. And it's a lot of just companies that it's just like, oh, they've proven profitability, have all the money. That's kind of been the road. It's a huge swing in a different direction, just quarter to quarter. I think in the next quarter, I agree with what you're saying. It's going to level off a little bit more and we're going to find a little bit more normalcy.
I think so. I mean, ultimately, nobody really knows these things. But yeah, I think like at the seed stage, there's still like a fair amount of deals being done kind of throughout this, just because there's always kind of seed deals being done. But I think we're going to see like seed get back to fairly normal. But I really found that like A/B stage was like really hairy. I also think it's just we've normalized a little bit on down rounds, that more and more companies are taking down rounds. And it's not a reflection of the company or their revenue or their trajectory. It's literally just the market has priced companies at a different value. And that's fine. Like if you're moving from, I don't know, a $15 million valuation to like a $12 million valuation, but your revenue's up 50%, it's like, okay, your existing investors might not be thrilled about that, but that means this company is going to continue. And ultimately, the company's not going to exit for another 3 to 10 years anyways. So I don't think we really need to worry about the valuation at that exact moment. Sure, it'd be nice to get a $20 million valuation instead, but the market's just not there. And these companies still need funding to grow. So I think that we've like normalized a little bit around down rounds. And I think that's healthy. And I don't really understand the stigma around down rounds ever, but I think that we've just realized that the market is pricing companies differently, and that's fine.
Absolutely. All right. So I know we're coming up on time almost, but I'd love to know, what is your top suggestion for founders given the current market? I know it's August. Like we said before, VCs are primarily up in Tahoe or up in Wyoming, wherever they are vacationing and getting some sun. But going into the fall, what would you tell founders to maybe prioritize in terms of getting their books in order and getting ready for maybe more activity?
Can I just be like the worst person ever and say get profitable? No, I think that like healthy growth is like what you're really going to have to focus on. And it's like, you can't be doing the growth at all costs method. You need to be sustainably growing. And whether you're still burning some amount of cash, I don't think that's a problem, as long as you're, continually investing in R&D, continually investing in growth, and ultimately expanding your TAM. I mean, like if you want to stand out to VCs, like I don't think there's any magic bullet here. It's still team traction and market. Yeah. And I guess say you're an AI company is probably the other thing that will get you in front of everybody. I'd actually say to do the opposite. If you're actually an AI company, be an AI company. If you're not, just let that go. Don't try and pivot or build some weird feature to say you're an AI company. Just be the company you are and be the company that makes sense. And just because the market's down doesn't mean that great companies still won't be built.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's just funny. That point about AI is one that has been echoed among several guests now that we've had recently. Yeah. I keep saying it, but after going to Collision and seeing just AI on every single banner, like without prejudice, it's like, oh, we deliver food, AI style. I'm like, what? It's wild. So I think that is a big kind of tangent takeaway, but no, this was fantastic. So Dallas, bringing it back to you. What's on for the rest of the summer on your end? Where will we find you next?
Yeah, so I'm actually headed back to Canada. I eventually have to see my family and spend some time with them. So yeah, I'll be back in Winnipeg actually at the end of the week, there for probably a couple weeks. And then we have an offsite in New York coming up sometime in September. So nothing too crazy, just looking to kind of recharge and refresh. We'll kick up big travel probably around October, November. Still figuring out where that is. It could be Tulsa or Costa Rica is the other place I'm looking at quite a bit.
Ooh, crossing fingers for Costa Rica. Yeah. Well, I hope we cross paths in your travels, Dallas. This was fantastic. I can't thank you enough.
100%. Thanks so much, Paul.
And thank you, listeners, for joining us. Please subscribe to What the Tech from Boast AI, wherever you get your podcasts.